kitchen. Now, at the moment, with everything that's going on in the world, wherever you are, I hope you are safe and well. Now, for this week's video tutorial, I've got more of a cake decorating techniques video for you. Sometimes you might find that you need to use dummy cakes. So for this week's video tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how I prepare and cover my dummy cakes. Now, dummy cakes are great. Maybe if you're creating a tiered cake and you want to add some height without adding in any more cake. You can also use them to create display cakes to show people the type of cakes that you can create. Or maybe you just want to practice your cake decorating skills and you don't want to create loads of cake that you're not going to need. Okay, let's get started. So I have a few different examples of some cake dummies here. Now, cake dummies are made of polystyrene and they come in so many different shapes and sizes. The ones that I've got here are 3 examples of some cylindrical ones that just measure 6 inches in diameter. So it will give you the appearance of a 6-inch cake. Now these ones are slightly different. The first one is 5 inches in height and has these nice sharp edges on the top and the bottom. The next one is slightly shorter. So in some cake decorating stores, you might not be able to get ones that are this high. So this one is 3 inches in height, which means if you wanted to create one this size, we would need to add a few of them together. And lastly, I've got another one again, which is 5 inches in height, but instead of having that sharp edge on the top, we have this curve. So in some instances, you may want to leave that. If you wanted to have a sharp edge on the top, you could either use it upside down and just fill in the edge with some fondant, or we can go ahead and prepare this one by just trimming off that curved edge. So if you wanted to cut your polystyrene, all you're going to need is a very sharp serrated knife, and you want to mark all the way around your polystyrene where you want to cut. Now this one actually has a line running around the top just before it curves over, so I'm going to use that as my guide. Taking your serrated knife, you just want to cut into the polystyrene and just move the dummy all the way around, making sure it's nice and straight. Now this can be a bit of a messy job and they do tend to stick to everything, but once that's trimmed off, we then have a dummy cake which has a nice sharp edge on the top and the bottom. Now some dummy cakes have a seam on one side. Now sometimes these can be just quite shallow, so you're not going to see it through the fondant, but sometimes they can be quite deep. So if there are any areas that you need to flatten down, you can just take a piece of sandpaper and just use this to smooth off any edges. Now if your cake dummies are coming into contact with anything that's going to be eaten, you just want to give them a small rinse if you have been using the sandpaper and dry them off thoroughly. Now, if you haven't been able to get the exact right size of dummy cake for the cake that you want to create, you may need to stick a few of them together. So I've just got my slightly taller one here and the slightly shorter one. So if they were put together, it would create a double-barreled cake. Now, in order to glue my dummy cakes together, you want to find an all-purpose glue or a glue which is solvent-free. If the glue has any solvents in it, it can dissolve the polystyrene that the cake drum is made of. So I'm just going to be using an all-purpose tacky glue. You also want it to be quite a strong glue, as you'll be working on these, covering them in fondant. Taking my smaller cake, I'm going to add that on top and just make sure that it lines up. Now I am going to be popping something heavy on top of this just to push those together, and you want to leave these to dry for a few hours or even overnight. Now if you do have any gaps where the 2 cakes meet, you can just use a small amount of fondant and just push those into the gaps, just smoothing them off before you add your final layer of fondant over the top. So I'm just going to add a box of icing sugar just onto the top of those, just to push those 2 together to allow that glue to dry. Once you have the cake dummy in the exact size that you need for the cake that you're creating, it's now time to cover it in fondant. Now, the thing with cake dummies is they don't weigh hardly anything, so they can be quite tricky to cover in fondant and keep them still. Now, there are different methods to hold your cake dummies in place, and you can buy different tools that allow you to do this. Now, the method that I'm going to be using today is the method that I've always used and it's always worked for me. So all you're going to need need is a board. Now I'm just using a glass cutting board here, but you just want something that's got a lot of weight to it. So maybe if it was made of marble or wood, something that isn't going to move if you're putting pressure on the cake dummy. Now to attach the cake dummy to my board, I use a really strong double-sided sellotape. Now this is a really strong double-sided tape you can just buy in a craft store, and it just sticks the polystyrene onto the board until we're ready to remove it. I'm going to put a few strips of the double-sided tape. I can then stick that in the center of my board, just making sure I push down so that the two are stuck together. I've then got my turntable, just as I would use if I was covering a real cake. I've popped on a small non-slip mat, and I'm going to pop my glass board on the top. Now, if this was a real cake, you would have a layer of buttercream or ganache over the top, which would allow the fondant to stick to your cake. In this case, we just have the polystyrene, so we need to make this sticky. Now, for this, I'm just going to be using some piping gel. The great thing about piping gel is it allows the fondant to stick and harden so that you can use the cake, but it also makes it easy for you to remove the fondant afterwards if you want to reuse your dummy cake. If you didn't want to reuse your dummy cake and you didn't have any piping gel, you could just mix some water with some icing sugar. This just creates a sticky glue. Now, using the water and the icing sugar, it does set quite solid. It makes it slightly harder to remove the fondant if you ever want to use the dummy in the future. So I'm taking my piping gel and just a large paintbrush, paint all the way over the top, just making sure that I add it especially to that top edge, which is the weakest point when you drape the fondant over the top. And as you can see, as I paint this on, the cake dummy is stuck firmly onto my glass board. Once your dummy is completely covered in that piping gel, we're now ready to add our fondant. Now, the fondant that I'm going to be using is exactly the same kind as I would use when covering a normal cake. So for this one, I'm just using some Renshaw fondant that I've coloured in a pink colour, and I'm going to roll that out until it's large enough to cover the cake dummy, just as I would if I was covering a normal sponge cake. I'm going to pop that over the top of my dummy cake and just make sure that you smooth down where that top edge is so that it doesn't rip from the top. I'm then going to use upward motions just to push that fondant against my dummy cake. Now, I do have a more detailed video showing exactly how I cover my cakes in fondant. So if you want to check this out, then I will put the link in the description below. Now, as I would if I was smoothing down a normal cake, I've just got my paddle smoothers and also my flexi smoothers. So I'm going to go in, just smoothing down those sides. So there we have our dummy cake covered in fondant. Now, once you're completely happy with how your dummy cake is looking, we want to remove the cake from our glass board. So I've just got a large offset spatula and I'm going to push it in at the bottom and just slowly work my way around, and we're just prising the double-sided tape away from the board. Your cake will come loose. Now, some of the tape has just stuck onto my board, which I can remove. If there are any pieces just on the bottom, just want to grab hold of those and just peel those off. Your cake is then ready to either add onto a cake board or add between different tiers on a stacked cake. Now, the thing that I've always found best in order to stick a dummy cake down, especially if you're sticking it onto a cake board that is covered in fondant, is royal icing, because it's set solid and it just sticks nicely to the polystyrene that's on the bottom. Now, if you were using this in a stacked cake that also has cake involved, then you would want to add just a thin cake board onto the bottom so that when this goes into your stacked cakes, it will just sit on top of any dowels that you've used. If you're creating a display cake where all the cakes are going to be stacked but they're all made of dummy cakes, then you can just put the next dummy cake just on the top and just stick it down with some royal icing. So here we have the covered dummy cake that you can now use just like a real cake and decorate however you like. I really hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial and it will find it useful in your own cake decorating. If you have, don't forget to give this video a like, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, then don't forget you can subscribe to the Cake Splendid YouTube channel. You can also hit the notification bell next to the subscribe button, and this will just alert you every time I upload a new video. So until next time, bye!